Hi everybody, this is Rebecca here and this is session 5 of the October 2023 Gogo retreat. This class is called Open Book, and the concept for this class is to create an acetate overlay which creates sort of an opening interactive element over the top of the 12 by 12 layout, and then when you open that up there is some more interactive elements, opening elements echoed in the photographs underneath. So the photographs lift, and there's a total of 5 photographs on this layout. And I print my photographs on a Canon selfie. They're just standard sizes, 4x6 prints, but because I add a white border, that makes my photographs slightly smaller once I've cut that excess off. So there are 5 photographs in total, and the dimensions for the photographs will be written in the class instructions. So I'm going to start by trimming down this paper. This is the collage paper from the Crate Paper Moonlight Magic collection. I'm going to trim 1 inch off of one side. I'm going to turn the page 90 degrees, and then I'm going to trim 1 inch off of the other side. So I'm left with 11-inch square. So that means that I've got a nice even white border when I offer that up to my white cardstock, and I'm just checking that everything lines up using my acetate overlay as well. I'm going to gut the inside of that white cardstock, so I'm not wasting any cardstock. I'm just going to trim, using my paper trimmer, sort of trim a chunk out of the middle of that. Sorry, the ice cream man just turned up outside my house as I was recording that. Hopefully you're not deafened. So there we go. I'm just going to gut that paper, and that will give me a bit of white cardstock to use on my journaling area, and just a white border to place my yellow collage paper. Out of that central piece that I've just gutted of the white cardstock, I'm going to cut 2 strips that are 1 1/8 of an inch wide, or 3 centimetres if you think in centimetres. So I'm going to trim 2 long strips from that inner that is left inside. In length, they are 9 3/4 inches long. And then I'm going to use my paper trimmer here to score them down the middle. I lost the scoring. There's a little scoring tool that fits into this Fiskars trimmer, and I've lost it, so I have to use the tweezers just to create that crease neatly down the centre of those pieces of paper. But yeah, I've lined it up neatly, and I'm just going to score right down the centre of both of those strips. And then I'm going to fold these strips over, make sure that they're well creased and that everything lines up neatly. There's no overlap or anything, and give them a good press down. So together these will create the sort of hinge area of my acetate front page, my little overlay. I wanted the acetate not to be flush to the layer underneath it, so I do apply this hinge using some foam. My tip would be to really cover the back part of your hinge with lots of foam. Don't leave any gaps, because I do end up having to go back in and add extra foam to make sure that everything is really well stuck down. So use that as a tip, learning from my mistakes, to really add lots of foam to this back part of your hinge. And I'm just checking on screen there that these 2 ends will meet up neatly and look as if they're one piece once they're stuck in place, and I'm happy with how everything's lining up. So now it's a case of sticking these pieces together. So I'm going to adhere that yellow collage paper, yellow side up, onto the white border using some double-sided adhesive roller. And I'm just taking time to make sure that all of the white borders are even, and then I'm going to stick that down gently. So I'm about to adhere my little hinge pieces in place, and I'm just taking off the backing tape off my little foam adhesive and making sure that they're really well lined up. You really cannot see that there's a join in the middle of those 2 pieces once everything's stuck together, but that's what it looks like at this point. You'll see that it's not flush onto the background page. It's a slight gap there with the 3D foam, the foam adhesive. And at this point I'm going to apply some red line tape onto the top part of that hinge for sticking my acetate top piece in place. Next, I spend a long time lining up the acetate with the background piece to make sure that everything, once it was closed, that everything really lined up neatly and at a right angle. Now, the mistake I made at this point is that I lined it up, as you can see, from the right. I've sort of lined it up at the right side first and then gone across and stuck it in place on the left-hand side. But actually, you'll see why that's a mistake in a minute, because whilst it lines up on the right, once I've stuck it down, it doesn't line up on the left. And I don't realise that at the time. So I do have to trim off some excess off that left-hand edge. So my advice to you would be that it's easier to probably line it up from the left side, have the excess hanging over on the right-hand side, and it will be easier to trim off the excess, because there's about, I would say, like maybe 2mm of excess acetate on that left-hand side. You can just about see it once I move that washi tape. So it all opens up really beautifully, and it's nice and secure with the red tape, but you can see there's a slight overhang of acetate, so I have to use a craft knife and a scissors to try and just trim that off. And so you could either trim that off before you stick it down, or stick your acetate in place from left to right rather than from right to left like I did. And as I mentioned a few moments ago, I went and added in extra foam adhesive because I felt like it was sort of creating a gap where I hadn't added enough. So after I'd stuck it down, I went and added in extra foam adhesive. So I would make sure that your hinge is really stuck with lots of foam adhesive. Now I'm going to start creating the interactive area on the inside of my layout, so on this sort of main part of my layout. I'm starting by sticking my main photo down onto this paper. This is the green side of the Heart Flutter Crepe Paper Moonlight Magic paper. I'm sticking it down on a piece of pattern paper that is 10 inches by 3 3/4 inches. So the photo is right down at the bottom of that strip of paper. And what I will do is, once I've trimmed that piece of paper, I will create a fold so that I can sort of create a interactive folding piece to go inside my layout. Next, I'm going to create an area for me to add my journaling. So I'm going to cut a piece of white cardstock that measures 3.5 by 4 3/4 inches. That's going to go on the inside of that main photograph lifting flap. And on screen you can see that I am measuring my photo to find the centre point, because I'm going to use my crocodile punch to just punch a small hole right through the sort of photograph to create like a little area to add a tab a bit later on. So I'm going to create two more similar flaps for my remaining photographs. So I've got 2 landscape photographs and 2 portrait photographs, and each one is obviously the same size. The photographs are the same size, and they need to go on pattern paper flaps that are the same size, but obviously they will need to be kind of on a different orientation than each other, because one is portrait and one is landscape. So on screen you can see that I'm making the landscape shaped flap, and that measures 2.5 inches by 6.5 inches in length. In my final layout, I add the landscape photo to the left of my main photo, and the landscape photo interactive flap opens from right to left, a bit like a book again. So the crease needs to be at the left side of the photograph for that landscape photo. And again, I'm going to create another strip from this heart flutter paper measuring 2.5 inches by 6.5 inches, and that will showcase my portrait photos. So I decided to have my portrait photos open, the flap will open from bottom to top, a bit like my main photograph. So once I've created those additional opening flaps, I'm going to stick the corresponding photographs onto the inside of those little flaps. And you'll see me make another mistake now, because I've marked out the centre of the page like I normally would, and I've put my main photograph in the centre of the page like I normally would, and I've stuck down my photographs and suddenly realised that actually they kind of need to be offset, because I've got a portrait and a landscape and they are all different widths. So I've gently peeled those off the background paper. Thankfully it didn't damage the paper, and I've moved them over to the right slightly because I wanted everything to look centred, but actually they will be offset because you know, they're slightly different shapes, those photographs. And then it's the challenge of embellishing this layout. So I've just kind of started by just placing things roughly where I think they need to go, but obviously you've got the sort of added aspect of wanting things to look nice with all these various pieces being open. So it's a case of just kind of placing things, closing the flaps, closing the acetate, seeing how everything looks, because you want it to look nice in every aspect. You want it to look nice when everything's closed and nice when everything is open as well. So it's just a case of really slowly embellishing and opening and closing everything to make sure everything looks good. Some of these are put on with foam adhesive to give some dimension, and obviously the hinge is applied using foam adhesive as well. So that gives us that sort of leeway to create some dimension in the layout if we want to. And two of these pieces of floral ephemera are stuck on over my photographs where the fold is. So to enable me to still be able to fold open my photograph flaps, I need to cut the ephemera, and then I've cut them and then added that little cut off piece back onto the photograph. It's hard to see it actually in the video, but in person you can see it. But it means that the ephemera can be stuck over the photographs whilst also still being interactive. I had thought of adding a curved title, and I'd made like a little stencil, but I didn't really like how it looked. So I've gone with a straight title on top of the acetate. So I've added, the title is "To Flower Girls Please," because we were drinking Flower Girl cocktails, which were lovely. But it also really suits this, you know, there's two girls and lots of flowers on this layout. So I felt like it was a good title to use. So next I've got a really small detailed blending brush. It's kind of like a pencil shape, very small blending brush to add some ink blending behind those flowers. So I'm just picking up the ink and using my tweezers to kind of like lift those ephemera pieces so I don't get any ink on the flowers themselves, and I'm adding that behind them. Once it's dry, it kind of gives like a really pale chalky orange colour, and just helps the flowers to stand out a little bit off that background. So next I'm going to fussy cut two of the purple butterflies from this butterfly side of that paper. I'm going to add that onto the acetate in just a moment. There we go, and I've stuck that down with red line tape, super sticky for the acetate, and then I've used the corresponding butterfly on the reverse of that acetate so that you can just see butterfly on each side. Next I'm going to go through and stick down some of the little gems and some of the sequins from the kit, and I've also added a tassel that I've made using the thread. So to create this tassel, you wind the thread several times around your fingers, leaving a good length of thread at each end of that loop. Use one of those ends to push through the middle of all those loops, and then using the other end of the thread, tie that together in a knot to secure all those loops together. And once they're secured together, you're going to kind of close the loop. So instead of a circle, you're going to squash them down into a closed oval shape. And all of the loops are going to meet at that one end. So you're going to get those two loose threads and tie them around the loops this time. So almost around the outside of those loops of thread. You're going to use the two loose ends to tie them in a knot and pull it really tight to secure all of those loops together. You're then going to cut through the centre of the loops using your scissors, and then cut all the lengths to the same length so it looks like a uniform length. I've then gone through and pushed those loose ends into that hole that I punched in my photograph. I thread my tassel through the little area there as well, and then I'm going to tie those loose ends around the tassel and kind of keep it in a knot, so keep it really tight, and I will cut off the lengths of thread that are left over as well. Next I'm using my black journaling pen. I'm creating a little border on this journaling panel here, and I'm going to add some wavy sort of like hand sketch lines just to make it look a bit less uniform. I've added some ruled lines, and I'm going to add my journaling onto those ruled lines. At this point I decided I wanted some ink blending in those corners, but I didn't want to get any orange ink on my white cardstock, so I've masked that area off with my some little strips of washi, and added in some of the Distress Oxide just in the corners. It kind of looks nice when the acetate's covered over, because you can see the sort of orangey tones in those corners. And then I've used some glossy accents to adhere some of the gems and sequins down on the acetate on the front.